The move outraged human rights lawyers, and they've returned to the Supreme Court this week to try to overturn the government's tough policy once and for all. Tonight, the man who headed the school for the detainees in youth jail is blowing the whistle on what he believes triggered the riots in the first place and why he thinks the young prisoners in Barwon are being tortured. By speaking out, he's jeopardising his chances of ever teaching in Victoria again. Nick McKenzie with this joint 7:30 Fairfax Media exclusive.
The behaviour that has been exhibited is disgraceful and it will not be tolerated.
We've got a system in crisis and somebody's got to take responsibility for that.
This is deplorable behaviour by these young people.
This is what most Australians have seen of Victoria's youth jails: chaos, destruction and violence. But one insider says there's a different story to be told about young people in prison.
There would be some people out there saying some of your students are murderers, they're rapists, they're carjackers, they've destroyed people's lives. Why should they be granted an education?
Well, they're right about those things, but if we don't, the consequences are much dire. It's our opportunity, through education, to reintegrate that child so that they don't perpetrate greater crimes in the future.
Brendan Murray is very good at his job. In 2009, he was named Victoria's Teacher of the Year for founding a school for disadvantaged youths. 2 years later, the state government appointed him to create a schooling system inside Victoria's youth jails. But last month he quit and now he's blowing the whistle and risking his chance of ever teaching in Victoria again.
I actually couldn't believe it. I mean, I've done a lot of time in adult prisons, children's prisons, and I hadn't seen anything like this.
In 2012, Parkville College was created inside the walls of Victoria's main juvenile justice facility. The college grew to 150 teachers and support staff. Its aim was to educate young offenders, especially those who'd suffered severe trauma or abuse, or who were intellectually disabled.
I certainly don't want these children to go on and create more damage in society. And if we don't have a go at that in youth justice, what are we doing? What's the point of youth justice?
Murray's schools were building momentum, with teen inmates finishing high school or TAFE programs and, in some cases, avoiding going back to jail once released.
Certainly the engagement that kids have with Parkville College is very high. The way they describe their experience is very positive. And if anything, I think that has been a bit of a guiding light, shining light through the system.
But around 2 years ago, some detainees stopped coming to class.
Lockdowns were being used rampantly, and while I say staff shortages might have been the greatest cause, they were also used as a behaviour modification tool and as a punishment. It just became acceptable.
And what did that mean for the inmates?
They're getting angrier and angrier throughout the day. It's understandable that there was a rise in conflict from that. The children weren't able to move and to go to school.
Victoria's youth justice crisis became public in March last year, when detainees at Parkville rioted on the roof. Then last November, fresh riots erupted at Parkville and dozens of beds were destroyed.
Enough is enough. These perpetrators of this damage will face serious consequences.
Victoria's government went into damage control, transferring a group of young detainees to a hastily repurposed wing of the maximum security Barwon adult prison.
These offenders have gone to adult jail because that's where they belong.
Tell me, when you arrived at Barwon, what did you see when you first arrived inside?
What I saw was 15 staff members really over the top, intimidating and threatening one child in really tight handcuffs. All visible, arms folded, sort of reading the riot act from what I could tell. But the kids were desperate for us to be there. They were frightened. They'd talked about being threatened to be facing concrete dogs, capsicum spray. They didn't understand why they were there. Look, I went out into the Barwon car park and I looked up torture on my phone and I saw something about, you know, the severity of the punishment, the purpose of it. In sort of layman's terms, I was convinced that they were being tortured. And I went straight back to Parkville and went into the most senior officers and said that they're torturing children at Barwon. Whether you think they deserve it or not, that's another argument, but this was state sanctioned and state delivered.
Human rights lawyers sued the government for putting children in an adult prison. The lawyers knew Brendan Murray strongly objected to the use of Barwon and wanted to call him as a witness. In the days before he gave evidence, Murray claims he was called by 2 senior bureaucrats.
I was told what the department would like the Supreme Court to hear and what the department wouldn't like the Supreme Court to hear. Well, I was being pressured to, encouraged and pressured to say that education was proper and equal to that of what children were receiving at registered campuses back at Parkville and Malmesbury.
And could education be delivered properly at Barwon?
No, not lawfully, no.
The Education Department flatly disputes Murray's claim he was ever pressured. The government argued in court that there were no other appropriate prisons for the detainees.
Do you think the Supreme Court was misled?
I do.
That's a big thing to say.
It's the truth.
Murray knew there were internal departmental discussions about where else the Barwon inmates could be put. He sent an email containing those plans to the detainees' lawyers.
From that point in the court case where you were seen to be assisting the lawyers for the inmates, you were at war with the department.
I didn't know that I was at war. I thought I was doing the right thing.
The department insists Murray's claims are false. He was suspended for sending the email, but was later cleared of improper conduct. The Supreme Court found the government's decision to send young inmates to Barwon Jail was unlawful, but the government responded by simply re-gazetting the Grevillea wing to allow around 20 teens to be kept there. Many are still there.
In the early weeks at Barwon, I raised concerns with the Minister that the conditions for those children were harsher than the conditions available in the most restrictive regime in the adult corrections system. No, conditions have improved a lot since then, but they're still very concerning. It's not an environment built for children.
Sitting at home suspended from work, Murray watched as more riots erupted at the Malmesbury Youth Jail, and the government promised to build a new so-called Supermax youth prison.
I'm absolutely concerned that we will go backwards. When issues about youth offending become as politicised as they have, the community gets concerned, the community wants a tough on crime response. Sometimes that can drive responses against what works.
The man who built a school inside Victoria's youth prisons fears that the state's tough reforms will undermine education and teen inmates won't get the chance to turn their lives around.
Whoever takes it over now, that's your job to maintain the good order. These kids aren't angels going in there, you know that. So you've got to have a game plan.
And there was no game plan?
Not that I'm aware of. And it's certainly not a consistent, coherent or sophisticated game plan. Otherwise we wouldn't be in this position.